Hello, everybody. Obviously, I'm not here with you today, but kind of as a spooky little thing, I use this website called Screencast so that I'm not ever really gone. That way, you're not losing some of the lessons that were planned for today, because I figure by tomorrow my voice will be completely gone. I just hadn't felt very well today. Anyway, today we're going to start the geography of Europe. We're going to use a large portion of the PowerPoint from a lady that's a retired teacher in New York, in the New York public school systems. She spends massive amounts of time amassing pictures and really cool maps so that you can use to study that. Some things we've added along the way, things that we think you need to know. Most of today's notes, you're going to follow along, are video questions. You're just going to fill them out as we go. Remember that you will get to use these notes on the Open Note quiz next week. So make sure that you're taking good notes. I guess next week is actually this week for you because you're a B-Day. So your Open Note quiz will actually be Friday of this week. I would recommend that you go back and read chapter 12 and 13 as well, just to kind of get some background information. If you want to add to the notes that we already have in class, you're more than welcome to use those on that Open Note quiz on Friday. So we're going to go ahead and start moving through some things. If I mess up, sometimes I do. This is a new website or new thing that I'm trying, so it may just take a little while to get used to. Okay? Just make sure you're following along. One thing you may remember from the United States history last year is that when people colonized the United States, they settled right along the eastern coast, most of them in cities like New York. They were not prepared for the climate that they encountered in the United States. They did not come with some of the supplies that they needed. Because if you take a look at this map, it does a really good job of showing you probably why that was. They came from cities like London and Dublin, some places in Paris, mostly from the western portion of Europe. If you look at this map based on what you know about climate, based on their latitude, London, Paris, Dublin, these places should all be a lot colder than what they encountered here in these cities like New York in the United States. So they weren't really prepared for winters here. Winters here in New York and some portions are at least much colder than those in Europe. And the large part of the reason is there is an ocean stream that comes from Africa and starts, and as it comes by the United States, it actually has a really funky curve, and it starts heading toward Europe. So that water that's coming off the coast of Africa near the equator is very warm, pushes that warm air towards Europe, and so cities like Madrid and Paris and London are much warmer than they should be based on their latitude. So therefore, when the colonists came, weren't expecting it. A lot of them did not survive that first winter. Okay? You kind of tell by looking at this slide why the United States is very nervous about Russia. The size alone is daunting. They're 5 times the size of us in terms of the land area. They have a lot of rivers. They have a lot of natural resources. So you might kind of understand, it just kind of gives a good picture image of why we're nervous about places. Hey, you're looking at a satellite image of Europe. It's a pretty good idea and gives you an idea about climate in certain locations. Notice if you're in Northern Europe, Western Europe, it's a lot greener than it is in, let's say, in Southern Europe. You know, it's dry areas here. You've got obviously the Nordic countries like Norway that have ice on them. There's Iceland over here. So you kind of get an idea that maybe some of their landforms are causing the climates to be a lot different than what you might expect. Europe is 3,800 square miles in total area. Places like Russia obviously add to that, the portion of Russia that is in Europe. Okay? You may not have realized that Iceland isn't considered a portion of Europe as well. Turkey is colored on this screen. Technically, Turkey, most of it's in Southwest Asia, but because it does have this small little peninsula that's attached to Europe, we do have it highlighted on the screen. City of Istanbul, which is there what we call a primate city, has 2 times as many people as any other city in the rest of Turkey. If you've ever been there, it's really beautiful. A lot of really pretty water areas. Used to be known as the name of Byzantium and Constantinople before it became Istanbul. One thing you're going to realize as we move through Europe is that the regions are vastly different in terms of culture and climate, economics for one thing, and that's, if you pay attention to the news, that's one of the big issues right now in Europe is the difference in levels of economies in the countries. Okay? Western Europe is probably the one you're most familiar with. It has countries like Spain and France and Germany and the UK and Ireland. Northern Europe has Norway, Sweden, Finland. Eastern Europe, if there's ever a problem anywhere in Europe, it's almost always in Eastern Europe. It contains places like Greece, Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, all these countries have had some trouble with economics and so forth. You hear about them in news an awful lot. Alright, I minimize it for a minute because the next thing you're going to see is a video over the basic geography of Europe. It lasts about 5 minutes. You're going to answer the first 5 questions on your notes down to what is tundra. Those all come from this first video. Make sure that you're paying attention because it does go quickly.
Europe lies in the northern hemisphere, and it is the second smallest continent. The only continent smaller is Australia. Asia, the largest continent, and Europe occupy the same landmass. The Ural Mountains form the boundary between the two. Russia, the largest country in the world, spans both continents. Europe is bordered by water: the Arctic Ocean to the north, the Atlantic Ocean to the west, and the Mediterranean, Black, and Caspian Seas to the south. Europe also includes many islands, including the British Isles and Iceland. Despite its small size, Europe is more densely populated than any continent except Asia. Most European countries are highly urbanized, and some of the world's most historic cities are found here. London, England; Paris, France; Rome, Italy; Berlin, Germany; Athens, Greece; and Moscow, Russia, to name a few. Humans have populated Europe for tens of thousands of years because it has a largely favorable geography. About a third of the continent is arable, or good for farming, a much higher percentage than on most other continents.
Okay, I pause it for just a minute to let you get the answer to that video question, catch up a little bit. You should have just gotten the answer to what is arable. Okay, if you haven't gotten through that, you've missed something. You can get with a neighbor here in a minute. I'm going to warn you too. It'll be helpful for you today to make sure that you have your maps out. It's a great chance for you to check as the videos go through, and we'll go through the PowerPoint and highlight some of the rivers and physical features. So if you want to get that out in a minute as you're watching the video, that's great.
And its northern forests offer ample timber resources. The climate is generally mild, in part because the warm Gulf Stream current flows from the Gulf of Mexico and along Europe's western coast. Large rivers course through the continent, providing important channels for transportation and trade. These rivers include the Danube, the Rhine, the Elbe, the Rhone, and Europe's longest river, the Volga. Europe has relatively low elevations, except for the Alpine mountain system that runs west to east. These mountains, the Carpathians, Balkans, Alps, and Pyrenees, form a natural barrier between northern and southern Europe. Northern Europe is cooler, wetter, and more heavily forested than the south. Scandinavia and northern Russia, both reaching above the Arctic Circle, have large stretches of permanently frozen subsoil called tundra. The south, sheltered from northern winds by the mountains, is drier and warmer. The Mediterranean region has a warm subtropical climate. The continent is commonly divided between Eastern and Western Europe. Many of the countries in Eastern Europe, along with Russia, were once part of the Soviet Union. Russia is almost twice as large in area as the United States or China, stretching 4,800 miles along the Arctic Circle from Europe to the Pacific Ocean. It forms the entire northern border of Asia. While most of Russia's land area lies east of the Ural Mountains in Asia, most Russian people live on the European side. That's because Asian Russia, or Siberia, is one of the least hospitable places on Earth, with its long, severe winters and recorded temperatures of 90 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. South of the the Arctic deserts and frozen tundra are vast swampy flatlands called the taiga, which is also the world's largest forest zone. The taiga is a belt of mostly coniferous or needle-bearing evergreen trees, which begins in Scandinavia and covers much of Siberia. The taiga is the primary source of Europe's timber. Unlike
Sorry, you guys, I had to pause it for a minute. I forgot my daughter has this Christmas clock that plays Christmas carols by the hour, so you heard that in the background. You should have all the answers by now, but we're going to finish up the last minute.
most of Europe, Russia is rich in mineral resources, especially oil, coal, natural gas, and iron. But rugged terrain, bitter climate, and great distances, especially in Siberia, have presented huge obstacles to collecting these resources. Much of Europe boasts fertile farmland and temperate climates. In addition, it also possesses great natural beauty thanks to its spectacular coasts and mountains. It is easy to see why this region has attracted people for thousands of years.
All right, one of the things about Europe, and I'm not sure that it really matters, but it's just kind of an interesting thought. You know, we always have you label the 7 continents. Technically, we've talked about this before. Is Europe really a continent, or is it just a portion of Asia? Most people that study geography feel like Europe is technically part of Asia, and so we give it the nickname Eurasia to show that it's all one continent. You can kind of get an idea why people feel that way. You look at that map and you can see that it's just a small, well, not small, I guess I should say, it's a large peninsula of Europe or Asia. So there's a lot of people that feel like maybe it shouldn't be its own continent. Not that it really matters. Okay, on your notes, you are going to label these 5 peninsulas as they come up. First one is the Jutland Peninsula. It's spelled Jutland. It's spelled like Jutland, but it's pronounced Jutland. And the only country on the Jutland Peninsula is Denmark and the islands that are a portion of Denmark. Second peninsula is the Scandinavian Peninsula. It includes the countries of Norway, Sweden, and Finland, or at least a portion of Finland. Third peninsula is the Iberian Peninsula, spelled Iberian. On the Iberian Peninsula are the countries of Spain and Portugal. Next one is very creative. The Italian Peninsula includes the country of Italy. Okay. The last peninsula that we're going to label on the notes is the Balkan Peninsula. Again, if you hear anything about troubles in Europe, it is almost always somewhere on the Balkan Peninsula, whether it's Greece and the fact that they're broke, whether it's ethnic conflict in Serbia or Croatia. All of these places in the Balkan Peninsula have had some issues in the last several years. We're not going to label the Anatolian Peninsula. We'll do that when we get to Asia. That's where Turkey is. Crimean Peninsula, we're also not going to label. Okay, so here they are again in case you missed them. Scandinavian, the Jutland Peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula, the Italian Peninsula, the Balkan Peninsula, and those are all that we label. Okay, here's where your map is going to help you. One thing about the map that I hate about this unit, I'm going to leave my map up on the board for you to look at so that you can kind of see where the borders are. But because of all these mountain ranges in here, they kind of obscure the borders and it's hard to see. Making sure that you're getting the borders colored in right, I'm going to highly recommend a place called Shepherd Software, spelled Sheppard, software.com. It will take you through the countries or physical features one at a time. You can do a tutorial session where the countries will be colored so that as you click on them, it shows this is Iceland or this is Kosovo. Kind of like what I told you last week, there is not an up-to-date map on Europe except on a place called Lizard Point, and then the one that I gave you in your packet so that you could see the accurate countries. Okay, you are going to label the Mediterranean Sea, shown at the bottom of the screen. I can't see if I get my mouse up here. label the Mediterranean Sea here, or you